Okay, we are rolling. We are rolling, brother. Champions of Champions boxing talk here. I'm back to entertain my audience again. You know, you lot should have a medal for listening to me go on and on and on. But I promise you, it's going to be good stuff tonight. First of all, congratulations to the England national team. They made it to the final against Denmark, but it's a tough game against Italy. We cannot overlook them. But congratulations, Gareth Southgate and the England team. Good job. But now, let's focus. Let's focus the same way that Senator Manny Pacquiao is currently focusing in the United States on his match with Errol "The Truth" Spence. You know, I've been watching some training footage and interviews that Manny's been doing with Ellie Setback of ES News. And I've been watching Errol Spence on the heavy bag and some of his training. And a few interesting things said by, I think it's Bringer of Rain Boxing Talk, who has made some fantastic points regarding this fight. And Thunderdome, who made some observations about, Thunderdome Boxing Talk, that is, about Errol Spence. And the dirty trick that he does try now and then in the ring, which is low blows. We're going to get on to all this. First of all, one topic that is starting to get on my nerves is the constant comparison between Errol Spence's match with Manny Pacquiao and Keith Thurman. People keep saying, oh, Errol Spence is a better welterweight than Keith Thurman. So what? Errol Spence, in my view, is a better welterweight than Keith Thurman, but styles make fights. For all we know, Errol Spence might do worse against Manny than Keith Thurman, even though he's better than Keith Thurman. Errol Spence might actually end up worse. Isn't Cotto better than some of the fighters that went the distance with Manny Pacquiao? But Miguel Cotto got stopped. You know, there's nothing. We can't go off these things. We can't go off the fact that Jeff Horn did this in Australia, so Errol Spence. It doesn't work like that. The triangle theory is not really precise in boxing. It just does not work out that way. It's a real head twist at times, but nonetheless, we can't go off these things. Lucas Matisse is a more accomplished fighter than Jeff Horn, isn't he? But Lucas Matisse couldn't get out the 7th round v Manny Pacquiao. You know, Keith Thurman is a better fighter than Jeff Horn, isn't he? But Keith Thurman was dropped and hurt to the body late. Jeff Horn wasn't. Yeah, he was staggering around the ring in the 9th round, but, you know, he survived that fight. But he's a worse fighter than both those guys. He's not as accomplished as either one of them. You know, Adrian Broner didn't get dropped against Manny Pacquiao. Adrian Broner survived without taking the same punishment that Keith Thurman took. But Adrian Broner is not a better welterweight than Keith Thurman. And let's face it, Keith Thurman has things about his game that Errol Spence doesn't. Boxing is a lot about intangibles. And let's face it, even though I think Errol Spence is a better welterweight than Keith Thurman, we never got to see that fight, did we? Who knows how that would have played out? I seen Mikey Garcia go the distance with Errol Spence. I seen Danny Garcia, who doesn't really throw any punches early on, go the distance with Errol Spence. And he did win some rounds late, Danny Garcia. Let's not forget that. I saw Sean Porter, who also lost to Keith Thurman, give Errol Spence all types of problems. The knockdown was probably the difference. In fact, I still had that fight between Errol Spence and Sean Porter a draw. So what does that tell you? You know, Errol Spence would not get in there and just blow Keith Thurman out the water. I completely disagree. Now, people say, oh, he's been hurt by Josecito Lopez, Castillo and all, Collazo, I should say, and Manny Pacquiao. But Keith Thurman is the ultimate survivor. Every time he gets hurt, who finishes him off? He survives and gets the second wind. That is Keith Thurman. I know he doesn't get as hurt frequently as Errol Spence, but he comes through it. It's almost like it recharges him. So we can't go off these things. And the things that Keith Thurman does have, that Errol Spence doesn't have, yeah, he probably doesn't have the straight up technique of Errol Spence at times. But he's quicker. His feet are quicker. When we used to talk about the top 3 best feet in the welterweight division in terms of foot speed, Keith Thurman was always in the argument, along with Terence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao. But Errol Spence wasn't. I think although Keith Thurman doesn't throw his punches like Errol Spence, his hand speed is quicker. I think Keith Thurman, though he at times elects to box rather than just come at you, can surprise you more at times than Errol Spence. Errol Spence, to me, you kind of know what he's going to do. He's just great at it. You know what he's going to do, but can you stop it? That's the question, right? Sometimes a fighter can have one sort of, many dimensions within one dimension. I'm not saying Errol Spence is one-dimensional. He's not. But you can see the pattern of what he does. And it's like David Beckham in football. People knew what he was going to do, get the ball and cross it in the box, but you couldn't stop it, right? But you knew what he was going to do. He wasn't like Cristiano Ronaldo that would go past 3 or 4 men and do something spectacular. You knew what he was going to do, and it was basic. He just did the basics to a world-class elite level, like Errol Spence. But we've seen Errol Spence in some tough fights now. Porter, Kell Brook was giving him work. Let's be honest. And Kell Brook's speed early was troubling Errol Spence, right? So I've talked about Keith Thurman's footwork, which is good. But Manny Pacquiao's footwork in the early rounds there against Keith Thurman made Keith Thurman's feet look ordinary, right? When you see the two guys on film, this is where they say there are levels to this. When you've seen the two guys, Thurman and Manny Pacquiao, on film, you thought Keith Thurman's feet might be comparable. Then fight night, they look worlds apart, particularly in the first half. That's shown there are levels to this. Even the power. We thought the power of the two of them, that Keith Thurman might actually have the stronger punches. Turned out fight night that Manny was the puncher in the ring. Do you know the reason? Chins are relative in boxing. Manny has been hitting the best chins in the world for years. Keith Thurman was knocking out good fighters, but not on the level of Manny Pacquiao. All of Manny Pacquiao's opponents were top class. That's why they were all going the distance. Right? But once Keith Thurman started fighting some of the guys that Manny was beating easily on that level, Keith Thurman's knockouts dried up. So has Errol Spence's. So we could end up with a scenario on fight night where Errol Spence is seen as the heavy-handed puncher. But as Chris Algieri said, we might actually see Manny as the puncher in this fight. Chris Algieri, who's fought both of them, and he got knocked out to Errol Spence. But that was after brutal fights with Ruslan Pravotnikov, Manny Pacquiao and Amir Khan. That's when Errol Spence stopped Chris Algieri. And he didn't stop him with one punch, it was multiple shots. Because he does like to throw Errol Spence. He's active, he comes forward. That's what he does. He got caught in the fire against Sean Porter, which I think Manny Pacquiao likes. So, Chris Algieri thinks that Manny Pacquiao in a single blow is a heavier puncher than Errol Spence. I know what he definitely is. He has more technique than Sean Porter that was able to punch Errol Spence multiple times. So, it is a Southpaw v Southpaw, and people are wondering how's Manny going to cope with that. How's Errol going to cope with it? Right? There's two guys in the ring, What? There's not only one guy in this fight that's world class. They're both up there, right? And what is, for a Southpaw, right? The wicked shot is the straight right hand down the pipe. Well, Manny's got an equivalent to that. Freddie Roach calls it the vanilla ice. That right hook, which shook Antonio Margarito very much in their fight. Very much. When Errol Spence lets his left hand go, right, he's going to be vulnerable to that shot if Manny covers the space, which at his best he can, when he covers distance. Here's another thing. Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia do not have the footwork of Manny Pacquiao. That's why Errol Spence was able to fight and box at the pace he wanted to. But you get a guy with footwork that's good. Sean Porter's footwork is good, but it's not Manny Pacquiao's. And you saw the conundrum that Errol Spence suddenly faced then. He was having to beat Sean Porter. He had to beat Sean Porter then at Sean Porter's fight because he couldn't do what he wanted to do. He had no choice but to meet Sean Porter in the fire. And as I said, Sean Porter's footwork is not as good. Sean Porter's punching technique is not as good. He doesn't hit as crisp or as hard as Manny Pacquiao. Yes, Manny Pacquiao is not the physical specimen that Sean Porter is, but Sean Porter was doing something in that fight that Manny Pacquiao is great at, and that's turning a big guy. Turning a big guy, reversing him onto the ropes, and then firing. And that was all through foot speed. And I'm going to talk about the training that these two guys have been doing. I've been looking for signs of Manny Pacquiao. I've been doing it on purpose. Trying to convince my mind that this guy on the pads and on the heavy bag is looking bad. But I can't do it. He looks crisp, guys. He looks crisp. And I think, again, Thunderdome Boxing pointed this out and it was classic. But I noticed this in Manny a year ago when there was talks of a Golovkin fight. Manny's punches for me are seeming a little heavier. He's a tad bit slower, but you see, his speed has got to be on point in this fight. But not as much as his stamina's got to be on point. Stamina is the key in this fight for me. If Manny can work well, a little bit better than he did against Furman. Who's to say again, that performance that he did against Furman, stylistically, it might be enough to beat Errol Spence. Who knows? Right? But he knows he's that much quicker than Errol Spence that maybe, just maybe, he can afford to take the speed down just a little, but have more brute force in them punches. Because I think Manny's plan is two ways. He's going to look to ice Errol Spence with these heavy blows he's working on. And I'm going to explain what the heavy blows are, right? He's going to work either towards that, or he's going to have worked very hard on his stamina to try and beat Errol Spence round for round. But those are the two main priorities in this camp for Manny Pacquiao. He's running. You've noticed they're really focused on his runs. They've really pushed him to be way ahead of the younger guys. Ellie Setback said it. For 42, he looks like 27. But that is the game plan. Them feet have got to be constantly going. He knows he's quicker than Errol Spence naturally anyway. He probably doesn't need much more speed, ironically. But he needs stamina and he needs that popping. But I think he was preparing a while ago for Gennady Golovkin, you know. And this is why he looks more toned, more, what's the word? More like he looks like a small rugby player, compact. You know, usually he's a very thin guy, but very heavy-handed. He's still light, he's still lean, but he's compact. And you can see the effects on the heavy bag. The hands are still quick, but the power, he's upped it a bit. And he is taking VADA testing, by the way, for those people, the conspiracy theorists out there. Manny Pacquiao has been tested more than 100 times in his career and never failed yet. Get over it. Stop looking for excuses before the fight's happened. Right? If Manny Pacquiao beats Errol Spence, he beats Errol Spence. Give credit where it's due. Right? Don't look for, Superman come down from planet Krypton and give Manny Pacquiao the body of steel. That's how he beat Errol Spence. If he beats Errol Spence, he beats Errol Spence. All said and done. And I'm just going to say this before I get onto some really key points. If Manny Pacquiao is still Manny Pacquiao, he beats Errol Spence. Spence's feet are slower. Spence's hands are slower. Spence does everything that younger Manny Pacquiao would want. He comes into your range. Unless Manny Pacquiao, you have to face Manny Pacquiao in the fire with a hand speed and accuracy and volume, right? That's what Manny Pacquiao wants. Errol Spence does not have the lucidness, or the elusiveness, I should say, of Floyd Mayweather. Errol Spence is not as naturally crafty a counterpuncher as Juan Manuel Marquez. He attempts to be a front runner. That is what Manny Pacquiao wants. And as I said, he's a southpaw. Well, guess what? That's Manny's line. The southpaw line is Manny's. The last southpaw, I know he's not Errol Spence or Errol Spence's size, but look at Diaz v Manny Pacquiao. That's the last southpaw Manny Pacquiao faced, and he demolished him. If Manny Pacquiao is still Manny Pacquiao, he beats Errol Spence. Stylistically, he's just got it made against Errol Spence. Of course, we have to go by a fight-by-fight basis here. Father Time beats Manny Pacquiao. It beats us all. Errol Spence, it could be his night. If Father Time turns up on the dot, on time, Errol Spence could do it. But that, for me, seems... People are talking about size and strength. Manny Pacquiao's come through size and strength for his whole career. I don't really consider that a factor if Manny Pacquiao is still as great, as he was a few years ago even. Right? He's dealt with size before. It's no big deal to Manny Pacquiao. You name one fight that Manny Pacquiao has lost due to size. People say, oh, Jeff Horn roughed him up. Jeff Horn lost. Look at the stats. Look at the judging was terrible in Australia. Jeff Horn lost. Keith Thurman lost. Margarito lost. Right? However you scored the Floyd Mayweather fight, Floyd Mayweather was the one on the back foot. Floyd Mayweather was not the one imposing his size on Manny Pacquiao. It was the other way around. Pacquiao has never lost to a guy who oversizes him. It just does not happen. If you beat Manny Pacquiao, you have to be crafty to do so. I'm not saying Errol Spence is not capable of it, but from what I've seen, if Manny Pacquiao still has the talents that we know he had a few years ago, this is no easy night for Errol Spence. Manny's capable of pulling it off. There's reason for hope and optimism. Right? There is good reason for optimism. Even if Manny Pacquiao goes into that ring fight night and is not quite as good as he used to be, I still think he gives Errol Spence a good fight out there. Right? It's just the styles, hand speed, foot speed, angles. Errol Spence does have advantages. But the advantages Errol Spence has, those are the same advantages Manny Pacquiao's been overcoming in his whole career. Against size and strength. And just in fortune, see, Manny Pacquiao's physical strength is underrated. There were times in that Keith Thurman fight where Keith Thurman was struggling with Manny Pacquiao's physiology, how strong he was. Physicality, I should say. So don't get it twisted. Right? Don't get it twisted. And we don't know if Manny Pacquiao can hit Errol Spence clean and often, which I think he can early, at least. How do we know he can take the shots as well as Margarito did, as well as all these other guys did? We don't. He's never faced a puncher yet as big as Manny Pacquiao in the welterweight division. Pacquiao has faced punchers as big as Errol Spence, and crisper punchers than Errol Spence. Pacquiao's kind of seen it all. If Errol Spence is to win this fight, he's just going to have to find the way to do it, and that's it. He's got no hidden formula. Errol Spence, see, with Floyd Mayweather had the speed of foot to escape Manny as much as Manny had the speed of foot to attack. Floyd Mayweather's defense was probably as quick as Manny Pacquiao's offense. Floyd Mayweather's counterpunching was as quick as Manny Pacquiao's combinations, maybe. At least for that split moment of the right hand. Juan Manuel Marquez knew Manny Pacquiao's rhythm. You always get a guy who's sort of got your number, but here's the thing. Even when the style was against Manny Pacquiao, it took Marquez 4 fights to beat him. Right? And Marquez is a crafty counterpuncher. Yeah, he's a warrior when he has to be, but Marquez sets things up differently than Errol Spence. And he's smaller and quicker. Quicker hand speed than Errol Spence. Floyd and Marquez have quicker hand speed. Right? Can you imagine Errol Spence getting on the ropes, a la Floyd Mayweather, trying to wriggle like an electric eel, or a slippery snake, trying to avoid Manny Pacquiao's shots? He would be tired within 4 rounds. But the likes of Floyd Mayweather do that naturally. That's their game. Even if Errol Spence was a better fighter than Floyd Mayweather, which he isn't, he's a different fighter than Floyd Mayweather. He's more designed to be hit by Manny Pacquiao than Floyd Mayweather. It's just is Manny Pacquiao a little bit, getting older in that sense. If it is, Errol Spence has a great chance. Because the sign of an aging boxer is when styles that you used to find easy start to make it difficult for you. That's the sign of an aging fighter. When a guy who they used to beat in their prime very easy, does everything they want to do, starts to give them trouble. That's when you know that time is starting to halt, so to speak. But let's talk about these key things that I've seen Errol Spence on the heavy bag. Malaysia a few years ago, Lucas Matisse was getting hit time and time again with Manny Pacquiao's left uppercut. I've seen Manny Pacquiao with Boo Boy Fernandez constantly, crisply throwing uppercuts to the pads in training camp, viciously. Do you know what I noticed about Errol Spence when he's on the heavy bag during his training footage with ES News? He throws his combinations, but he's ducking his head low as he's doing it. He's ducking his head low. That's what Lucas Matisse did. And when Lucas Matisse was doing that, Manny Pacquiao was nailing him with the uppercut, the left uppercut. And then when Lucas Matisse was sort of going more upright, as I said, once the left hand drops, you throw the left hand, you're then subject to Manny Pacquiao's vanilla ice right hook. And Errol Spence throwing combinations, leaning sort of into that heavy bag, like he did against Sean Porter when he was in the trenches. The head was low. It was in a funny, hittable position, if you know what I mean. Boxing is about spacing. But that head is low. He's throwing combinations against the heavy bag, right? It's a perfect opportunity there for Manny to execute his fast hands and that uppercut, right? Here's another thing. As he's throwing the shots, his right hand does not come up. So he's leaving himself open to Manny coming over again with the speed, with the right hand, right? And another thing, I want you to watch Errol Spence, how he attacks the body. Before I get on to the low blow issue, which Thunderdome Boxing brought up excellently, right? But check out Bringer of Rain Boxing Talk. He has made some excellent points. The stuff he's said in this camp has been deja vu. I've been thinking the similar thing, and then he's come out and said it, right? He's beat me to the punch. Excuse the pun. But this is a critical point for me. When Manny Pacquiao in the past has took rests on the rope against Cotto, against Jeff Horn ironically, and against Keith Thurman, in the same motion, again this is due to foot speed, Keith Thurman and Miguel Cotto particularly have been throwing or trying to throw shots at Manny to the body and head in one fluent motion, right? Cut the ring down, throw. Errol Spence, you watch him. When a guy's on the ropes, stationary, Errol Spence sort of walks the guy down, but then he plants his feet and then throws body shots. There's a moment where he stops, and it's more clunky than the other guys. It's more mechanical. He stops and then throws body shots. I'm just thinking, if Manny Pacquiao's feet are on the money, he's going to be out of range before Errol Spence can start throwing them shots to the body. When's the last time you saw Manny Pacquiao take sustained punishment to the body? If you're going to say Keith Thurman threw a few, again, Keith Thurman has quicker hand speed and quicker foot speed. And again, he's more of a fluent puncher. I'm not saying he's a better puncher or he's even got better timing. I think Errol Spence has better timing. But the speed is with Keith Thurman. And again, we really don't know who would have won out of Errol Spence and Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman would have held his own, in my opinion. He wouldn't have got blown out there in 4 rounds. But again, these are all things to consider, and it's important. Manny Pacquiao, if his feet are up to scratch, takes away a huge part of Errol Spence's game there. Huge! And the jab, everybody's talking about the jab. Manny Pacquiao can slip a jab, and the jab's so effective with Errol Spence because Mikey Garcia was just stood mid-range, not cutting the ring off, not cutting the ring down, not getting into Errol Spence's face, not being able to cover distance with his feet because they're not as fast as Manny's feet. Porter was less vulnerable to the jab because he was able to take Errol Spence in close quarters and make it a phone booth fight where the long arms and the jabs are not as effective because he hasn't got the distance on him, if that makes sense. Manny is going to come in and out, and he's got head movement. Again, Errol's got great jab, but has he faced head movement like Manny's? I don't see it yet, right? So that is a big thing to consider. His head is low, a la Lucas Matisse. Vulnerable to Manny's left uppercut. The right hand is low. Or I should say, when he's firing, the head is down and the guard is not there. Now, against fighters without Manny's hand speed, you get away with that. With Manny's hand speed, you may pay for things like that. Errol Spence gets Manny to the ropes, stops, has a good think, brushes himself down and thinks, I'm going to throw a body shot. Well, too late. The guy's gone. You know what I'm saying? But watch Errol Spence's body attacks. They're methodical. But I'm telling you, for a guy of fleet footness like Manny Pacquiao, there is an escape avenue because he gives you that split second. I know Floyd Mayweather will be looking at that and thinking, yeah, he's not doing that with me. He's getting up to the ropes, and when he takes that little stutter, I'm going to be gone before he throws those body shots. Faster fighters than Errol Spence have struggled to land multiple body shots on Manny Pacquiao. Let's just say that. Again, Father Time could catch up with Manny. I'm not saying any different. But if Manny's still Manny, I think he beats Errol Spence. If it's the Manny Pacquiao that beat Lucas Matisse that turns up, or Keith Thurman, I think Manny's got a great chance. One Thing and Thunderdome Boxing brought this up. And I agree. They've got to watch for Errol Spence's low blows. They've got to watch for Errol Spence's low punches, the way he rips them in, right? A lot of that has gone undetected by the boxing media. I'm not saying this is going to be as dirty as the Jeff Horn fight. But if there is a dirty thing that Errol Spence does do, it is that. But if Errol Spence attempts a long jab down there, he leaves himself wide open up top again to Manny Pacquiao's foot speed. But the movement of Manny Pacquiao could cut that out still. But they have to watch that. Freddie Roach, if he sees that, he's got to nip it in the bud to the referee immediately. But I'm being honest here. I'm seeing Errol Spence being just Errol Spence. And he looks good for what he does. But I wonder, is the style wrong for him? And we still don't really know what he's like after that accident. Because Danny Garcia didn't really put anything on him early on. Manny's going to try to. What is he like when he takes a heavy punch from a puncher? Because Danny Garcia was on the cusp a few times of landing that big shot, but it didn't come. Not until late anyway. He was just letting rounds slip. And Danny Garcia, again, he has to get up to his opponent before he throws a combination. He has to plant those feet and then throw a shot. It's very clunky. It's very mechanical. And Errol Spence can be away before that happens, or at least make some distance. Manny Pacquiao can punch on the front or back foot. He doesn't need, or he can plant his feet and be more flat-footed. But he doesn't need to somehow get the guy in the right position, plant his feet and then throw. He can throw from funny angles too. The placement of feet, the movement of feet is not Danny Garcia, it's different. So Manny will be able, in my opinion, no matter what sort of man he turns up, to have some success early. And how does Errol Spence respond when he gets hit hard? And Errol Spence's style, which is to come forward, there is always the theory that he could get iced. I think Manny Pacquiao, there is two strategies, as I've said before. He's looking to use that stamina to outwork Spence and win every round, if he can up that stamina. If he can, he's in business. Or I think he's looking to ice Errol Spence, because he's looking again a little more heavy built, more like a tank than a rattlesnake, and he's hitting the heavy bag hard. I won't be surprised if he tries to surprise Errol Spence and ice him early. And if that doesn't come, he's got plan B. But I think those are the two plans. Either to win as many rounds as he can with the stamina, or he's looking to shock Errol Spence. I think Manny Pacquiao is thinking, I'm really going to test you, boy. I'm really going to test you. See what's in there, right? And we'll see what goes from there. Que sera, sera. But Pacquiao is looking good. He's looking a bit better than I thought he was going to look, to be honest with you. I'm quite surprised. But he is looking crisp, and he is looking... The heavy bag is just... There's already dents in it, and we haven't really got into the peak of training camp yet. So he's looking for power, he's looking for stamina. The speed is obviously there. Pacquiao doesn't need to work on speed, that's in him naturally. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But I think if Manny's Manny, we could be in for another shock. And I think we're in for a good fight anyway. I don't think Errol Spence wins this easy. I don't think he puts Manny away in 3-4 rounds. Mikey Garcia got through it. May have lost, but they got through it. That's a lightweight. The other guys got through it. He didn't stop Garcia. He didn't even drop Danny Garcia. He didn't stop Porter. And Manny Pacquiao, Danny Garcia did say that Keith Thurman hits harder than Errol Spence, and Manny Pacquiao took some shots from Keith Thurman. So to say that Errol Spence is just going to ice Manny Pacquiao, that's a little short-sighted. But anyway, that's me for today. I've given you guys a lot. This is Champions of Champions Boxing Talk. There'll be more of an update soon. I'm out, brother.